My name is Julian, married 3 years, and in the eyes of the Voss family I rank somewhere below the security guard and above the potted plants. Tonight was the Voss Group annual gala. Anyone with a name in Baycrest was there. I stood in the corner in a suit Victoria's assistant had tossed at me, holding a glass of orange juice, watching my wife work the room. Victoria wore a wine-red backless gown, her hair swept up, her neck long, looking every bit the proud swan she was. She took over Voss Group at 25 when her father passed, and in 5 years she quadrupled the company's value. In Baycrest business circles, her name commanded universal respect. But nobody knew she was married, and certainly nobody knew her husband was me, a man who had spent 3 years as an invisible fixture in the Voss household. I swirled my orange juice, and was about to find a corner to sit down when I spotted a man in a white suit heading my way. Adrian, Victoria's college friend, officially her personal image consultant, known around town as Victoria's male best friend. He held a wine glass and wore that smile I had learned to despise over 3 years. Pleasant on the surface, knives underneath. Julian, drinking orange juice all by yourself. Adrian stopped in front of me and looked me up and down. Well, I suppose at events like this, orange juice suits you better. Red wine would be wasted on your palate anyway. I said nothing. 3 years in, I had long since learned to keep my mouth shut around these people. Adrian took my silence as an invitation. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Julian, do you know what people in our circle say about you now? They say Victoria keeps a well-trained dog at home, does all the laundry and cooking, doesn't even know which way the company headquarters faces. The wine on his breath hit my face as he spoke, and I stepped back half a pace to get away from it. That half step was all it took. My shoulder bumped into a passing server whose tray tipped. The crystal glass Adrian had just set down flipped over, dumping half a glass of lukewarm water across the sleeve of Adrian's white suit. The water spread into a dark stain instantly. The gala was loud, but in that moment every sound seemed to stop. Adrian looked down at his sleeve, and the smile on his face faded by degrees. He did not look at me. Instead, he turned slowly toward where Victoria stood at the center of the crowd. Victoria was chatting with a few business partners when she seemed to sense something. She lifted her head and her gaze traveled across the room to us. She saw Adrian's wet sleeve first, then saw me standing opposite him. I watched her expression turn to ice, not the coldness of a stranger. Something worse, the coldness you reserve for a piece of garbage that has just stained your carpet. Victoria excused herself from her conversation and walked toward us on her heels. She moved beautifully, but I was in no position to appreciate it. Knew what was coming. What happened? Victoria's voice was not loud, but each word carried a sharp edge. Adrian let out a sigh and said in a voice dripping with put-upon magnanimity, Victoria, it's nothing. Julian accidentally knocked over a water glass. This suit is old anyway. Don't be upset. The words were perfectly calibrated. He absolved himself completely while appearing to defend me, making himself look generous in the process. Victoria did not take the bait. She looked at me with eyes like a midwinter blade. Julian, did you do this on purpose? I finally spoke. It was an accident. I was just. She raised a hand and cut me off. She turned and gestured toward the entrance. 2 men in black suits approached at once. Knew them both. In Victoria's personal security, the kind who stationed themselves outside the CEO's office and executed her orders with the precision of machines, never asking questions. Hold him, Victoria said. Then she turned and walked over to Adrian, pulling out a handkerchief to dab at the water stain on his sleeve. The guards seized my arms, their grips like iron clamps. I tried to pull free and could not. Victoria, what are you doing? I stared at her back, my voice tight. She did not turn around. Still dabbing at Adrian's sleeve, she said, Adrian, don't be upset. I'll make him apologize. Adrian waved a hand. Forget it, Victoria. It's not worth it. Not worth it? Victoria tossed the handkerchief onto a table and turned to face me. He spilled water on you. There has to be a price for that. She walked up to me and jabbed a finger into my chest. Julian, for 3 years you've eaten my food, lived in my house, spent my money, I have never shortchanged you. But tonight you embarrass me at this event and humiliate Adrian. That bill is getting settled." She stepped back and addressed the two guards. "Slap him. Keep slapping until Adrian is satisfied." Adrian stood to the side and said with theatrical reluctance, "Victoria, that's really not necessary." But his eyes gleamed with undisguised satisfaction. The first slap landed, and my ear rang with a sharp, metallic hum. The guard's palm was thick and hard. It hit my face like a slab of iron. My head snapped to the side, and the taste of rust filled my mouth. People in the gala noticed the commotion, but nobody came over. Invos Group employees pretended not to see. The business guests glanced over and then resumed their conversations. Nobody was going to stick their neck out at an event like this for a man known only as Victoria's kept husband. The second slap followed immediately. Same spot, harder. Sparks bloomed in my vision, and the left side of my face burned like it had been set on fire. Adrian watched, the corner of his mouth lifting. He picked up a glass of champagne from a nearby table, gave it a lazy swirl, and said nothing. Third, fourth. By the time the fifth slap landed, I could not stand on my own. The guards held me upright. My left cheek had swollen badly. My mouth was full of the taste of blood, and my ears were ringing so loudly I could barely make out the sounds around me. Adrian finally set his glass down and offered a satisfied smile. "Victoria, that's enough. I'm satisfied now. Really, you didn't need to get so worked up. I'll take Julian out for a meal sometime, and we'll put this behind us." Victoria glanced at him, then walked to a safe in the corner of the hall, punched in a code, and pulled out a brown paper envelope. She came back and tossed it at my feet. The envelope hit the floor, and bundles of $100 bills spilled out, 200,000 per slap. 5 slaps, 1 million. Victoria's voice was flat and mechanical. "Take the money. Leave now. Don't stand here embarrassing yourself any further." I kept my head down, staring at the cash scattered around my feet, at the blood dripping from the corner of my mouth onto the polished floor. I thought about my father 3 years ago on his deathbed, gripping my hand and saying, "Julian, I've met the Voss girl. She's a good person. Rein in that temper of yours and make a good life with her." My father did not know that his son had not lost his temper. He had buried it deep in his bones. The fortune my family built over 3 generations, I had taken it and grown it into an invisible capital empire after I took control. But outside of a few trusted people around me, no one knew. Victoria did not know. The Voss family did not know. Not a single one of the so-called tycoons in Baycrest had any idea. All they knew was that Victoria Voss had married a nobody. A man with no job who stayed home all day like a piece of furniture. I bent down slowly and picked up the scattered bills one by one, placing them back into the envelope. My hands trembled slightly, not from humiliation, but from the effort of restraint. When the last bundle was in the envelope, I straightened up, tucked it under my arm, and turned toward the exit. In behind me, I heard Adrian's voice. "Victoria, your husband certainly knows how to take the money and run." Then Victoria's voice, cold as ice. "Don't mention him. He ruins my appetite." I did not look back. I walked out of the gala one step at a time. The night wind outside the hotel hit my face, and the swollen left side stung sharply enough to make me suck in a breath. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before the other end picked up. "Julian." "Marcus," I said, licking the dried blood at the corner of my mouth. My voice was calm. "Get everything ready. At 800 million invest. Pull it all out of Voss Group tomorrow. Every corporate account, every private channel. Not a single dollar stayed." There was a pause of 2 seconds on the line. Then Marcus said, "Understood. And if the Voss family calls, make sure they cannot reach my phone." I cut him off. "Starting tomorrow, nobody in the Baycrest business world will be able to find Julian." I hung up, walked to the large marble trash bin by the hotel entrance, and tossed the envelope of cash inside without a second glance. $1 million. Victoria thought that 1 million could buy my dignity and let her save face in front of her male best friend. She did not know that what she bought with that 1 million, she would soon be begging on her knees to give back at 100 times the cost. Inai got into a nondescript black sedan parked by the curb, the car I used for grocery runs. Victoria thought it was beneath the Voss family image and refused to ride in it. She did not know that in the glove compartment of that sedan was a key. The office that key unlocked held a document that stated in clear terms, Julian, controlling shareholder of Apex Capital. Personally available liquid assets followed by 10 digits. Inai started the engine and looked at the glittering hotel tower in the rearview mirror. Inai let out a slow breath. In Victoria. In see you tomorrow. In no. Tomorrow you will not be able to find me. And when you do see me again, I hope you remember every single word you said tonight. Inai got home just before 11 at night. Our marital home was in the most expensive gated community in Baycrest, oceanfront, with a view of the water the moment you opened the windows. Victoria had bought the house, and only her name was on the title. Inai had not objected at the time. For someone like me, whose name was on the title, did not matter very much. Inai parked in the garage and entered through the side door. The lights on the ground floor were still on. Mrs. Hart, the housekeeper, was clearing the coffee table in the living room. She looked up and froze when she saw my face. "Mr. Julian, your face." I tripped. I said with a wave of my hand, heading directly for the stairs. Mrs. Hart opened her mouth behind me but said nothing. She had been with the Voss household for 5 years, and had long since learned not to ask questions she should not ask. Inai walked into the master bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a black duffel bag from the very bottom. Inai had packed this bag a while ago. It held everything I needed to take with me, in a few changes of clothes, some personal documents, and a laptop that had never been connected to the internet. The closet was lined with clothes Victoria's assistant had bought, selected according to Victoria's taste. Inai touched none of them. Inai only took the few old pieces of clothing I had brought with me when I first moved in. The wedding photo still hung above the bed. Victoria's smile in the picture was thoroughly formulaic, and I stood beside her like an afterthought. At the photo shoot, the photographer had spent at least 20 minutes adjusting Victoria's angles and lighting. When it was my turn, it was one click and done. Inai took a document out of my pocket and placed it on the vanity. In divorce papers. My lawyer had drafted them a month ago. Inai had been waiting for the right moment. Tonight, those 5 slaps delivered the moment. The terms were simple. Inai would walk away with nothing. In no claim to any marital assets. In no claim to any post-divorce financial settlement. Victoria only had to sign her name, and we would have no further relationship whatsoever. Inai signed the last page, left the pen beside it, and closed the document. When I walked out of the bedroom, Mrs. Hart was standing at the top of the stairs, holding a glass of warm milk. She must have been bringing it up to me. She saw the duffel bag in my hand and froze. "Mr. Julian, are you?" "Mrs. Hart, thank you for everything these past few years." I nodded to her. "From now on, if Victoria comes home late, don't wait up for her. Get your rest." Mrs. Hart's eyes reddened. She did not try to stop me. She just held the glass of milk out toward me and said, "Mr. Julian, drink it before you go. It's cold outside." I took the glass, drank it down in one go, handed the empty glass back to her, and walked down the stairs. In the garage, I got into the driver's seat of my black sedan and started the engine. As the car pulled out of the gated community, I looked one last time in the rearview mirror at the house. In 3 years of living there, I had never once thought of it as home. It was Victoria's house. Inai was just a guest who happened to stay there. Inai merged onto the coastal highway and called Marcus. "Julian, everything is set for the withdrawal. At 8 tomorrow morning, Voss Group's finance director will receive the notification." "Good. I'm not going back to the apartment tonight. Have the team switch over all systems on that end. Starting tomorrow, the name Julian will yield no useful information on any public channel." "Understood. One more thing. Miss Celia called this afternoon. She said she's arriving in Baycrest tomorrow and asked if you have time to meet." I was quiet for a moment. Celia, co-founder of Apex Capital, the sharpest blade in my arsenal. For the past 3 years, ever since I stepped back from the public eye, she had handled all of Apex Capital's external affairs. The business world knew Celia as a powerhouse operator, but no one knew that standing behind her was a man named Julian. "Tell her I'll be free tomorrow," the usual place. Got it. I hung up and rolled the window down a crack, letting the night air in. My left cheek was still swollen, painful to the touch. 5 slaps, 200,000 per slap. In Victoria had calculated that bill very precisely. 1 million to buy out a 3-year marriage. In her eyes, she had gotten the better end of the deal. Innie pressed down on the accelerator and headed toward the other side of Baycrest. On the far side of the city stood a nondescript office tower. On the 28th floor, a modest sign hung by the door. Apex Capital Baycrest office. Outside of a handful of people in my inner circle, no one knew that this humble-looking office controlled a capital portfolio exceeding $100 billion. And no one knew that for the past 3 years, every stroke of seeming good fortune Voss Group had enjoyed, every well-timed resource connection, every mysterious investor who stepped in at a critical moment, all of it traced back to the same man, the man Victoria had slapped 5 times in public tonight and thrown out of her sight. My phone buzzed as I passed through an intersection. In a message from Chloe, Victoria's assistant, notifying me that I was expected at Voss Group headquarters at 10 tomorrow morning. Victoria had something to give me. I guessed it would be the divorce papers. Victoria would see the signed documents and probably be delighted. She would finally be able to shed her dead-weight husband with full legitimacy. Innie did not reply. I switched my phone to airplane mode. The sedan turned onto a quiet old street lined with sycamores on both sides, their shadows swaying under the street lamps. I parked in front of an aging townhouse and cut the engine. This townhouse was property left by my grandfather on my mother's side. It was under my mother's name and had no connection to the family trust or to the Voss family. Over the past 3 years, whenever the weight of things got too heavy, I would come here alone. Victoria did not know this place existed. She had never cared enough to ask. I grabbed my duffel bag, got out, and unlocked the door. The interior was exactly as it had been 3 years ago. Old leather sofa, chipped mahogany coffee table, my grandfather's portrait on the wall. Innie turned on the light, tossed my bag onto the sofa, and went to the kitchen to boil water. As the kettle was heating, Marcus called again. "Julian, the Voss withdrawal is fully in motion." Also, I looked into Adrian's recent activity. Go on. He dropped $6 million at the tables in Las Vegas last month when he got back to Baycrest. He moved funds through a shell company to cover the whole. The shell company has 2 shareholders, Adrian himself and the other one. Marcus paused. The other one is the deputy finance director of Voss Group, in a man named Gerald. I picked up my teacup and blew on the steam. Keep digging. Pull every record of every transaction between Adrian and Voss Group, as far back as you can go. Understood. Julian, one more thing. What? Victoria has a board meeting tomorrow morning. The agenda is a new round of financing. If news of the $800 million withdrawal breaks in the middle of her meeting, it's going to be very ugly. I took a sip of tea. The bitterness spread across my tongue. That is her board meeting. It has nothing to do with me. Marcus, I've had a long day. We'll handle the rest tomorrow. Of course, Julian. Get some rest. I hung up and leaned back on the sofa, staring at the old chandelier on the ceiling. My face still throbbed with a dull ache, but what hurt worse was somewhere deeper. 3 years ago, when I agreed to my father's wish and married Victoria, I had genuinely intended to build a life with her. I had even imagined telling her one day who I really was, letting her see that the man she had married was not a nobody. But Victoria never gave me the chance. In her eyes, I was a liability beneath her station, a kept man, someone who did not even deserve basic dignity in front of her male best friend. Tonight, those 5 slaps had smashed whatever faint hope I still held. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the sofa. Tomorrow the weather in Baycrest was going to change, and the man named Julian would vanish completely from everyone's radar. By the time Victoria discovered the truth, it would already be too late. Victoria hated 2 things above all else: losing control and surprises. This morning she got both. She was sitting at the head of the conference table on the top floor of Voss Group headquarters, a PowerPoint presentation for a new financing proposal spread open in front of her. 12 board members sat around the table, and every face in the room was carefully arranged. But Victoria's expression was colder than the black marble of the conference table. 10 minutes earlier, Gerald, the finance director, had walked in holding a fax. His face was the color of freshly painted drywall. He bent down and whispered something in Victoria's ear, his voice so low that it was barely audible, but a few board members nearby still caught fragments. Apex Capital, 800 million. Full withdrawal. Victoria had been about to turn to the next slide of her presentation. Her hand stopped in midair. For 3 full seconds her fingers did not move. Then she looked up with an expression none of the board members had ever seen before and said, "What did you just say?" Gerald wiped his forehead and placed the fax in front of her. It was an official communiqué from Apex Capital, printed on letterhead, bearing the company's seal. The language was polite, but absent. Due to internal strategic restructuring, Apex Capital hereby withdraws its entire investment in Voss Group, totaling $800 million effective immediately. Victoria stared at that fax for a full 10 seconds. The conference room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning vent in the corner. The 12 board members exchanged glances. Several were already reaching for their phones under the table. Who signed off on this at Apex? Victoria's voice was eerily calm. Celia, Gerald said, Executive President of Apex Capital. Victoria's fingers tightened. Celia, that name carried serious weight in capital circles. She had appeared on the scene 3 years ago and made her name consolidating 7 industrial park projects around Baycrest with lightning speed. Over the past 2 years, Apex Capital had expanded aggressively under her leadership, its portfolio growing larger by the quarter. People who wanted to get close to her could form a line from Baycrest to the other side of the country. Voss Group's partnership with Apex Capital had begun a year ago. 800 million to be injected in 3 tranches for upgrading Voss Group's smart manufacturing production lines. Victoria had personally closed that deal. Celia had praised her proposal highly, and both sides had signed a 5-year strategic cooperation agreement. 5 years. Only 1 year had passed. "Get Celia on the phone," Victoria said, standing up. She told the board members, "We are in recess," and walked out of the conference room in long strides. She entered her office and shut the door. The moment the door clicked closed, she hurled the folder in her hand onto her desk. A framed photo toppled over. It was a picture of her and Adrian at some charity gala, both holding champagne flutes, smiling radiantly. Her phone rang. "Chloe," her assistant said in a careful voice. "Victoria," Apex called back. "Celia's secretary says she is in a private capital meeting all day and cannot take calls. She also said what? She also said the withdrawal decision is final. There is no room for negotiation." Victoria drew a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. She had been in the business world long enough to know that every decision had a reason behind it. Apex would not withdraw without cause. Someone had to be pulling strings behind the scenes. She started calling people in her network. Her first call went to Harrison, president of the Baycrest Chamber of Commerce. Harrison's voice was full of vague pleasantries on the phone. "Oh, Victoria, I just heard about this. Apex Capital, you know how it is. Celia does things her own way, never consults anyone. I'll ask around and let you know if I hear anything." That kind of talk was pure courtesy, and Victoria knew it. Her second call was to Malcolm, president of Baycrest Mercantile Bank and a longtime associate of the Voss family. Malcolm at least gave her something concrete. "Victoria, I'll be straight with you. The news about Apex pulling out hit this morning, and your stock price has already started sliding. You need to stabilize things fast, or when the market opens tomorrow, you're looking at losing at least 20% of your market cap in a single day." Victoria hung up and stood at her floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city below. Her knuckles had gone white. 800 million. For Voss Group, 800 million was not fatal, but it was a severe wound. More importantly, once word of Apex's withdrawal spread, it would trigger a chain reaction. Other investors would hold back and wait. Suppliers would tighten payment terms. Banks would reassess lending risk. That was the real threat. She needed to find a way in. Victoria pulled up Celia's private number from her contacts and dialed. It rang once and then cut off. She stared at her phone, thinking she had misdialed, and tried again. This time it rang 5 times before being rejected. On the 3rd attempt, the line went straight to voicemail. Victoria stood at the window, looking at her own reflection in the glass, and suddenly felt something deeply unfamiliar. Last night, she had stood at the pinnacle of Baycrest's business world, laughing and talking, moving hundreds of millions with a wave of her hand. This morning, the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Something occurred to her. She pulled up another number on her phone. Julian. She had told him to get lost last night and thrown $1 million at him. By all logic, the man should have gone home and done what he always did, which was pretend nothing had happened and continue being a piece of furniture in her house. But this morning when she woke up, the house had been empty. No breakfast in the kitchen, no sign of him on the living room sofa. That black sedan was not in the garage, and on the vanity, a document in divorce papers. She had been in a rush to get to the board meeting, and had only glanced at it before tossing it aside, thinking she would deal with it tonight. Now a strange unease crept up her spine. She dialed Julian's number. The number you have dialed is not available. Please try again later. Not available. Victoria frowned. If there was one thing Julian was, for all his uselessness, it was reliably available. In 3 years, no matter when she called, no matter how impatient her tone, Julian had always picked up within 3 rings. Today, not available. She dialed again. Same message. In a 3rd time. In a 4th. In a 5th. Every time. That same cold electronic voice, repeating the same words over and over. Victoria's fingers began to tremble, not from fear, but from a sensation she had rarely experienced, the loss of control. She realized how staggeringly little she knew about Julian. His name, his phone number, his social security number. She barely knew a single thing about any other part of her husband's life. Who were his friends? Where did he go? What was his past like? She had no idea. She had simply never cared enough to ask. She dialed a 6th time. The number you have dialed is not available. A 7th. The number you have dialed is not available. An 8th. Chloe pushed the door open to find Victoria dialing the same number over and over, her expression unsettling enough to make Chloe stop short. Victoria, are you all right? Victoria set the phone down and turned around. When she faced Chloe, her expression had returned to normal. She was, after all, the CEO of Voss Group. When the sky falls, you hold it up first and deal with your feelings later. I'm fine. I need you to look into something. What is it? Julian. Find out where he went today, who he saw, where he is right now. Victoria paused. You have 2 hours. I don't care how you do it. Find him. Chloe blinked. In her memory, Victoria never initiated any conversation about her husband, and on the rare occasions she mentioned him, it was always with a tone of irritation. Asking her to track him down now with a 2-hour deadline was highly unusual. Also, Victoria added, stopping Chloe before she could leave, pull up information on that black sedan Julian drives. I'll send you the plate number. Have traffic surveillance check the footage. I want to know everywhere that car went after he left the hotel last night. Chloe nodded and hurried out. Victoria sat back down in her office chair. Her eyes fell on the divorce papers on her desk. She had stuffed them into her bag on her way out this morning. Now she pulled them out and laid them flat, turning the pages one by one. The terms were simple. The husband, Julian, voluntarily relinquished all claims to joint marital property and would walk away with nothing, seeking no financial compensation from the wife, Victoria Voss. On the signature line, Julian had already signed. The handwriting was steady, each stroke even and controlled. There was none of the trembling or scrawl you would expect from a man whose wife had just slapped him 5 times in public and thrown him out of her sight. Victoria stared at that signature, and a strange feeling crept over her. She could not pinpoint what was wrong, but she had known Julian for 3 years and had never once imagined he could write with such a steady hand. In her mind, the man was meek, timid, barely able to speak above a murmur. His handwriting should have been cramped and uncertain. But those letters on the page were firmer than the signatures on board resolutions. Victoria set the papers down and picked up her phone again, dialing the number she had called more times than she could count this morning. "The number you have dialed is not available." She slapped the phone down onto the desk, closed her eyes, and forced her mind to work through the problem. Apex withdraws. Julian vanishes. In divorce papers left on the vanity, the timing was too tight to ignore, but she dismissed the thought almost immediately. How could Julian possibly have any connection to Apex Capital? The man had not held a decent job in 3 years. He stayed home, watched television, cooked meals, and occasionally drove that battered sedan to the grocery store. He and a figure like Celia, who moved markets with a phone call, belonged to entirely different universes. She was overthinking it. Her phone rang. Chloe. Victoria, the traffic footage came in. Chloe's voice had an odd note to it. After Mr. Julian left the hotel last night, he drove to Cedar Lane on the south side of town. Cedar Lane? Victoria frowned. That was an older part of the city, quiet streets and aging houses. What would Julian be doing there? And then the footage shows his car turning into the courtyard of an old townhouse. It did not come back out. Inai sent someone to check the property this morning. The door was locked and no one was inside. But Chloe hesitated. The property management records show the townhouse was originally registered to an elderly woman who passed away years ago. The current occupant listed on file is a man. His last name is the same as Miss Julian's. Victoria's fingers tapped slowly on her desk. Dig deeper on that property. Inai wants the full registration history and the exact relationship between the original owner and Julian, and find out if Mr. Julian has any other assets under his name. Already working on it, Victoria. Chloe paused again. But there's a complication. While we were searching, we discovered that Mr. Julian's personal information suddenly became extremely clean starting this morning. In beyond the most basic identity records, we cannot find any banking activity, any spending history, any travel records. It is as if someone deliberately scrubbed everything clean. Victoria was silent for a long moment. The sunlight streamed through the window and fell onto the divorce papers on her desk. Julian's signature caught the light, each stroke looking as though it had been carved into the paper with a blade. She was beginning to understand that she might never have truly known her husband at all. "Keep looking," she said, and hung up. The office fell quiet, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning. Victoria sat in her expensive CEO chair and, for the first time, found that the chair felt cold. She picked up her phone and dialed the number one more time. "The number you have dialed is not available." This time she did not put the phone down right away. She held it to her ear and spoke quietly, barely above a whisper, as though saying the words only to herself. "Julian, who are you?" There is a private club on the cliffs of Baycrest's eastern shore called the Cliffside. It sits perched above the ocean, surrounded by water on 3 sides, accessible only by a single winding road. The club does not admit non-members. The membership threshold is absurdly high. Fewer than 20 people in all of Baycrest carry a card. Victoria did not have a card. Her car was stopped at the foot of the winding road. The guard glanced at her license plate and shook his head with polite finality. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the Cliffside has a private event tonight. We are not accepting non-members." Victoria lowered her window and held out her business card. "Victoria Voss Group. Please let someone know I am here to see Celia of Apex Capital. It's urgent." The guard took the card, glanced at it, and his expression did not change. "I apologize, ma'am, but Miss Celia has left instructions that she is not seeing anyone without an appointment today." Anyone without an appointment, the meaning was clear. Celia knew people would come looking for her and had shut the door in advance. Victoria sat in her car, staring up the winding road at the building glowing with lights at the top, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. She had spent an entire afternoon working her contacts just to learn that Celia would be here tonight, attending a private capital gathering. In word was that everyone attending was a real heavyweight, the kind of people who discussed deals in the tens of billions. Voss Group's 800 million withdrawal was probably not even an appetizer at a table like that. But Victoria could not afford to walk away. Voss stock had dropped 8% over the course of the day, and tomorrow's open would only get uglier. She had to see Celia. She had to understand the reason for the withdrawal. She had to give herself a chance to fight back. She clenched her jaw and called Adrian. "Adrian, do you know anyone with a membership at the Cliffside? I need to get in and find someone." Adrian was quiet for a moment on the other end. The Cliffside? That private club on the bluffs. In Victoria, even I haven't gotten through those doors, but I know a guy who's a member there. I can ask. Ask fast. 5 minutes later, Adrian called back. His tone was hesitant. "Victoria, my contact says tonight's gathering at the Cliffside is very high level. Heavy hitters only. He says he can pass along a message, but he cannot guarantee you'll get in. Tell him to pass the message to Celia at Apex Capital. Tell her Victoria Voss is requesting a meeting." She hung up and leaned back in her seat, watching the ocean through the windshield. End waves struck the cliffs below with a heavy, rhythmic force. Her mind drifted unbidden to last night. Julian bending down after those 5 slaps, picking up the scattered cash 1 bill at a time, his movements unhurried, his face showing no anger, no humiliation. Nothing at all. At the time she had read it as spinelessness. Now, replaying the image in her mind, the way he bent down to gather that money did not look like a beaten man picking up a handout. It looked more like someone picking up something he had never cared about in the first place. Her phone rang. Adrian's contact had passed the message. Celia would see her. 10 minutes only. Victoria took a breath, started the engine and drove up the winding road. The Cliffside's main hall was more understated than Victoria had imagined. No gilded decor, no ostentatious chandeliers. The entire space was built from natural wood and stone, every detail radiating a quiet, self-assured confidence. People with real money never needed to prove they had it. Celia was seated in a tea room off the main hall, a ceramic tea set arranged on the table before her. She wore a sharply tailored black suit, her hair pulled back cleanly to reveal a face with striking angular features. She looked younger than her magazine photos and considerably sharper. "Miss Voss, please, sit." Celia gestured with a raised hand. Her tone was polite but distant. Victoria took the seat across from her and got directly to the point. "Miss Celia, I came to discuss Apex Capital's withdrawal in person. We signed a 5-year strategic cooperation agreement. Only 1 year has passed. Under the terms of the contract, a unilateral withdrawal. The penalty will be paid in full per the contract." Celia interrupted, lifting her teacup for a sip. "The terms are very clear. If Apex withdraws unilaterally, we pay 15% of the invested amount as a penalty. 15% of 800 million is 120 million. It will be in your accounts within 3 business days." Victoria was caught off guard. Celia's response was not what she had expected. 120 million in penalties, agreed to without a flicker of hesitation. That signaled a level of resolve that left no room for negotiation. "Miss Celia, I want to understand the reason," Victoria said, lowering her stance. "You have seen Voss Group's performance over the past year. The smart manufacturing production lines are on schedule. The second phase market feedback has been excellent. From a purely commercial standpoint, Apex has no reason to withdraw." Celia set her teacup down and looked at Victoria. The look was complicated, like someone regarding a person who understood nothing at all. "Miss Voss, in business, sometimes it has nothing to do with performance." The words could not have been plainer. The withdrawal was not driven by business reasons. It was driven by something else entirely. Then what reason? Victoria pressed. "If Voss Group has done something to fall short, Miss Voss." Celia cut her off again, and this time there was a flicker of impatience. "I agreed to see you because someone passed along your request as a courtesy to the Baycrest business community. As for the reason for the withdrawal, I am not at liberty to disclose it. Your 10 minutes are up. I must ask you to leave." Victoria stayed in her seat. She fixed her eyes on Celia and suddenly asked, "Do you know a man named Julian?" Celia's hand, lifting the teacup, paused in midair. The motion was almost imperceptible, but Victoria caught it. "Julian. And I don't know the name," Celia said, setting the cup down. Her expression had not changed. "Miss Voss, I truly do have other matters to attend to. Please see yourself out." Victoria rose and turned toward the door. She was at the threshold of the tea room when Celia spoke behind her. "Miss Voss, sometimes the person you least expect may be your greatest card. It's a shame when you throw that card away like trash." Victoria spun around. Celia was already looking down at her phone, clearly done with the conversation. Walking out of the tea room, Victoria crossed the main hall toward the exit. Her steps were unsteady. Celia's last words repeated in her head. The person you least expect may be your greatest card. The person she least expected. Julian. She had to get home immediately and tear up those divorce papers. As long as she had not signed them, they were still legally married. Julian was still her husband. Whatever that man had been hiding, she was going to face him and demand answers. She was nearly at the exit when she heard a stir of voices and footsteps behind her. The group from the private meeting was emerging and heading this way. Victoria glanced back on reflex, in and froze where she stood. 7 or 8 people were coming down the hallway, every one of them a name that commanded respect in Baycrest and beyond. Celia of Apex Capital walked slightly behind and to the side of one man, her posture deferential, speaking to him in a low voice. That man walked at the very center of the group, wearing a dark grey cashmere coat, his stride unhurried, his bearing completely at ease. Everyone around him instinctively angled themselves toward him, their body language radiating deference. His face was one Victoria knew better than almost any other. Julian. It was Julian, her husband, the husband she had slapped in public last night, the husband she had thrown $1 million at and told to get lost. The useless husband she had not bothered to look at properly in 3 years, was now standing at the center of the most elite capital circle in Baycrest, surrounded by people vying for his attention, listening to Celia report to him with an expression of complete calm. Victoria's mouth opened, but her throat felt like it had been sealed shut. Not a single word came out. Julian clearly saw her as well. His steps slowed for just a beat. His gaze rested on her face for 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Victoria searched desperately for something in his eyes. Anger, vindictive satisfaction, scorn, any flicker of emotion at all. She found nothing. Julian looked at her the way a person looks at a stranger. He even gave her a small nod, the kind of polite, impersonal acknowledgement you give a passerby of no particular importance. Then he looked away and continued his conversation with Celia, walking past Victoria amid his circle of powerful associates, heading deeper into the hall. He did not stop. He did not speak a single word to her. Victoria stood at the exit like a statue bolted to the floor. She watched Julian's back grow smaller down the hallway, her mind completely blank. She finally understood why Apex Capital had pulled its investment, and she finally understood what Celia had meant. You threw your greatest card away like trash. For 3 years, she had thought she was keeping a dog at home. And now she understood that the dog was in fact the man standing at the very summit of Baycrest's entire capital world. And last night, with 5 slaps and $1 million, she had pushed him away for good. "Julian," she called out. The man at the end of the hallway did not turn around. He did not even slow his pace, as though the voice calling his name belonged to someone who truly had no connection to him at all. Victoria watched him vanish around the corner, and a coldness she had never felt before crept from the soles of her feet all the way to the top of her head. It was not regret. It was not anger. It was something far worse. She suddenly understood that the number she had been dialing frantically all day, the number that would never go through, might never ring for her again. Her phone buzzed in her bag, in a message from Chloe. "Victoria, I've pulled Mr. Julian's asset records. The situation is complicated. You should prepare yourself. I'm sending the file to your email now. Please look at it before deciding what to do next. Victoria opened her email and tapped the attachment. 3 pages of asset listings. The first line alone nearly knocked her off her feet. Victoria called my name in the hallway of the cliffside, and I heard her. But I did not turn around. Not because I was still angry about the 5 slaps. Inni did not turn around because I knew Victoria too well. She was a businesswoman. Calculating to her core, she had chased me to the cliffside and called out my name in that hallway not because she had suddenly realized she loved me, but because she had discovered I had something she needed. Celia walked beside me and said in a low voice, "Julian?" "She's still standing there. Her eyes are red." "Leave it," I said. Inni pushed open the door to the private dining room. Inside, over 20 people were already seated. Every one of them was a core participant in tonight's capital gathering. The combined assets under the control of the people in this room could buy Baycrest twice over. When I entered, every person at the table rose to their feet at the same time. Inni gestured for them to sit and walked to the head of the table, but I did not sit down. Instead, I reached into my pocket and placed a digital recorder on the tabletop. Before we discuss business, I said, "I'd like everyone to listen to something first." The room fell quiet. Celia gave me a look. She did not know what I was about to play, but she asked no questions. She simply stepped back and yielded the floor to me entirely. Inni pressed play. The recording opened with the noise of a crowded bar, glasses clinking and bass music thumping in the background. Then Adrian's voice came through, slightly slurred but perfectly clear. "I'm telling you that Victoria Voss woman, everyone thinks she's so sharp. She's actually ridiculously easy to play." Another male voice on the recording said, "Adrian, what do you mean?" Victoria's got a reputation in Baycrest for being impossible to deal with." Adrian laughed, the sound greasy and self-satisfied. "In business, sure. But when it comes to people, she's clueless. You know why she's kept me around all these years? Because I understand her. Her mother died when she was young. Her father was always working. She's starved for emotional validation. You just hand her a glass of water when she's tired, say a few nice things when she's stressed, and she thinks you genuinely care about her." "So, Adrian, do you care about her? I mean, not even a little bit." Adrian's voice dripped with contempt. "If I just wanted to sleep with her, I could have made a move 3 years ago. What I want is access to her resources. Voss Group's supply chain, distribution channels, connections. Every piece of that is worth money. You think I paid for my sports cars myself? Everything I have. Victoria fed me from her own hand." The sound of glasses clinking came through the recording. The other man said, "Adrian, aren't you worried Victoria will find out someday?" "She'll never find out." Adrian let out a drunken belt. "You know, her loser husband. The guy named Julian or whatever. As long as he's around, Victoria always feels superior, always thinks I'm a treasure by comparison. All I have to do is step on that useless guy once in a while in front of her, and she lumps me in with her as being above him. Honestly, that Julian guy is the best shield I've got." Someone in the dining room sucked in a sharp breath. The recording kept going. And besides, Adrian's voice swelled with increasing arrogance. "Victoria is wrapped around my finger now. You know what happened just yesterday? Her husband spilled a glass of water on me." Inni put on a sulky face, and she ordered her security to slap the guy across the face 5 times. Think about that. In her eyes, I'm 100 times more important than her own husband. With that kind of hold on her, Voss Group's money might as well be my money. That's impressive, Adrian. "So what's the next play?" "Next step," Adrian said, smacking his lips. "I'm reaching into Voss Group's finance department. You know Gerald, the deputy finance director? He's my guy. We've already connected the dots. Last month, I dropped 6 million in Vegas, and he helped me square it on the books. Once I've got the finance pipeline fully under control, Victoria can be as tough as she wants. She won't be able to turn on me even if she figures it out, because by then her own books won't be clean either." The recording ended. The dining room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds. Then the room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Someone cursed Adrian as a snake. Someone else said they had seen through that pretty boy from the start. Someone slammed the table and said men like that needed to be crushed. Inni turned off the recorder and pushed it to the center of the table. "Everyone," I said, I have already had my team compile a full evidence trail on how Adrian and Gerald, Deputy Finance Director of Voss Group, moved funds and covered the paper trail. The charges include embezzlement, misappropriation of corporate funds, and money laundering. Combined, the amount exceeds $100 million. I looked around the table at the 24 people seated there. Some were Voss Group suppliers. In some were Victoria's business partners. In a few were so-called connections that Adrian had spent years cultivating. I know some of you have had business dealings with Adrian. I'm not playing this recording to assign blame or go after anyone in this room. I'm asking everyone to make a choice. I tapped my finger on the recorder, effective immediately. Anyone in the Baycrest business community who continues to do business with Adrian, maintain any association with him, or even share a meal with him. Apex Capital will consider that a direct provocation against me personally. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The weight of the name Apex Capital was something every person at that table understood clearly, and my position behind Apex Capital, by tonight, was equally clear to everyone in the room. This was not a request. It was an ultimatum. A construction materials magnate was the first to stand and declare his position. Julian, you have my word. I'll tear up the 2 contracts I signed with that little weasel the moment I get back to my office. Disgusting. One after another, others followed. Within minutes, over 20 people had voiced their allegiance. Some pulled out their phones right there and called their subordinates, issuing immediate orders to terminate all dealings with Adrian. I watched this unfold, my expression calm. But inside I was not without feeling. For 3 years, Adrian had strutted in front of me, trampling my dignity time and again, putting on his little performances for Victoria. I had endured it for 3 years, and what I had waited for was this exact moment. Did not need to hit him. I did not need to curse him. Did not even need to do anything to him directly. All I had to do was make it so he could never survive in this city again. Celia moved to my side and said quietly, "Julian, people outside are saying Victoria still hasn't left. She's been standing in the parking lot for nearly half an hour. If she wants to stand, let her stand. Also about the recording we just played, Adrian has likely already gotten wind of it. His phone is off, he's not at home. He may have run. He won't get far," I said. "Marcus already has people stationed at the airports and train stations. Embezzled over $100 million from Voss Group. That is not a debt he can run away from. The Financial Crimes Unit has opened a case. By tomorrow afternoon at the latest, he will be in custody." Celia nodded and did not press further. The dinner continued. The power players took turns approaching me with toasts, their words circling around a single theme, getting closer to Apex Capital. I accepted each glass with the appropriate courtesy, but my mind was elsewhere. Victoria had been standing in the parking lot for half an hour. Knew this woman too well. She had been proud for 28 years and had never once lowered her head to anyone. Even when she was wrong, she found a way to settle things with money, like throwing $1 million at me and assuming 5 slaps could be balanced on a ledger. Now she knew the truth. She knew her useless husband was the real power behind the capital. She knew the male best friend she trusted most had been selling her out behind her back the entire time. But she still did not know how to say the words "I'm sorry." So she stood in the parking lot, unable to come up, unable to leave. It was nearly midnight when the dinner broke up. Walked out of the cliffside and saw Victoria's car still parked in the lot from a distance. She stood beside it, her hair windswept from the ocean breeze, her heels planted on the concrete. Her posture was still straight, but her shoulders had dropped. She saw me come out and stepped forward. Did not stop. Marcus pulled the car around and I opened the rear door and got in. As the car drove past her, I heard her call out through the window, "Julian, give me 5 minutes." Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but said nothing and did not slow down. The car turned onto the winding road, and Victoria's figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the night. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. Adrian was finished. With that recording made public, everyone in our circles would cut ties with him. Once the Financial Crimes Unit made their move, he would be facing at least 5 years behind bars. Victoria's male best friend, the man she trusted most, the man she had slapped her own husband for. in a complete fraud and a parasite. Victoria had likely figured that much out by tonight. But there was something else she might not have figured out yet. Over the past 3 years, Adrian had been able to sink his teeth into Voss Group again and again, not because he was a criminal mastermind, but because Victoria had been blind. She had stomped into the dirt the one person who was genuinely looking out for her and held close to her heart the one person who was bleeding her dry. That kind of mistake could not be fixed by standing in a parking lot in the cold wind for half an hour. My phone buzzed. In a message from Marcus, "Julian, Victoria has left the cliffside. She did not go home. She's heading toward the office. Also, Voss Group has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. The agenda is how to handle the fallout from Apex Capital's withdrawal." I read the message and put my phone away. Tomorrow would bring another hard fight. What Victoria did not yet know was that what awaited her next would make an 800 million withdrawal feel like the easy part. Victoria did not sleep that night. After leaving the cliffside, she went directly to the office and locked herself in. She sat in front of her computer screen, staring at the asset report Chloe had sent, and stayed there until dawn. 3 pages, every line item trailed zeros that made it hard to breathe. 67% equity in Apex Capital under Julian's name. 41% of Orion Holdings under Julian's name. The actual controller of 3 core industrial parks in Baycrest, Julian, and investments spread across over a dozen different sectors, from semiconductors to healthcare, from renewable energy to high-end manufacturing. Each segment alone was a top-tier player in its industry. And all of this, Chloe noted, was only what she had managed to uncover in a single day of searching public records. Chloe had highlighted a line in red at the bottom of the email. The above data reflects only basic business registry search results. The actual total assets under Miss Julian's name are projected to far exceed the scope of this preliminary report. Due to time constraints and limitations on search permissions, a complete assessment of assets cannot be provided at this time. The words "cannot be provided at this time." Victoria stared at them for a long while. Memories began surfacing, things she had never bothered to examine before. She remembered 3 years ago, when her father had told her that although the family Julian came from had faded, Julian himself seemed honest and steady, the kind of man who could build a stable life. She had listened with nothing but disdain in her heart. She, Victoria Voss, being married off to some honest and steady nobody. It had felt like a joke at her expense. She remembered the wedding day, Julian, standing beside her, calm from beginning to end, in no nervousness, no awkwardness, none of the fawning insecurity of someone who had just married above their station. She had dismissed it at the time as woodenness. Now she understood. In a man who controlled hundreds of billions in capital would not feel nervous at a city-level corporate wedding. She remembered the day after the wedding, when she had tossed Julian a supplementary credit card and said, "Use this from now on." Julian had taken it, glanced at it, and dropped it into a drawer. In 3 years, he had never charged a single cent to that card. She remembered last month when Voss Group had faced a hostile takeover attempt. The bidder's pricing and timing had been surgically precise, backing Voss Group nearly to the wall. She had scrambled for help, running herself ragged for an entire week. Then the bidder had abruptly withdrawn with no explanation. She had chalked it up to luck at the time. Looking back now, there was no such thing as luck that convenient. Victoria buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Outside, the sky was turning pale. When Chloe pushed the door open, she found Victoria still in the same clothes from the day before, her makeup smeared, her eyes shot through with red. "Victoria, the board members are all here. They're waiting in the conference room." Victoria lifted her head, rubbed her face with her hands, and stood up. And her legs felt weak as she walked, but she kept her spine straight. Passing through the corridor, she even nodded to a few employees. She could not collapse. Not now. The atmosphere in the conference room was worse than Victoria had braced for. 12 board members sat around the table, every face grim. The projector displayed the day's stock chart. In a green line plunged downward like a knife. The decline now exceeding 15%. Voss Group's market cap had shed nearly $3 billion overnight. In a full day of the Apex Capital withdrawal, news spreading through the markets had detonated everything. Victoria, a senior board member to her left, began. His tone was measured, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. I think we are owed an explanation regarding Apex Capital's withdrawal. 800 million pulled without any of us hearing a whisper beforehand. That is not proper governance. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table and opened the folder in front of her. I am already investigating the reasons behind Apex's withdrawal, and I called this meeting to discuss a response plan. First, we need to find new investors quickly to fill this gap. Second, we must communicate with our upstream and downstream suppliers and distributors to stabilize confidence. Third, Victoria, another board member, cut her off, his tone sharper than the first. I'm hearing that Apex's withdrawal is connected to your personal affairs? That you offended someone behind Apex Capital? A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Victoria's fingers tightened on the folder. The thing she had feared most was already here. The Baycrest business circle was too small. What had happened at the cliffside could not be contained. Once Julian's identity was exposed, the fact that Victoria Voss had slapped the controlling shareholder of Apex Capital 5 times in public would become a label she could never shake off. That is a personal matter, Victoria said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. It has no bearing on the subject of this board meeting. No bearing? A third board member stood up and tossed a document onto the table. Victoria, I received this morning. In a notice from Baycrest Mercantile Bank stating that due to significant uncertainty risk at Voss Group, we are required to top up our loan security deposit within 10 business days, or they will call in the loan early. The words landed in the conference room like a bomb. All 12 board members reacted at once. Someone cursed under his breath. Someone else pulled out his phone to make calls. The room spiraled into chaos. Victoria flipped open the bank notice, read it line by line, and then closed the folder. I will speak with Malcolm directly. Speak with him? The board member let out a cold laugh. Victoria, you do understand that Malcolm was introduced to you by Adrian. And now that Adrian is in custody, the bank's posture has shifted accordingly. At the name Adrian, Victoria's composure finally cracked. She had received an update from the Financial Crimes Unit that morning. Adrian had been detained at the airport the previous night and taken into custody along with Gerald, Voss Group's deputy finance director. The charges were misappropriation of corporate funds, embezzlement, and money laundering. Combined, the amount in question exceeded $100 million. Gerald had confessed quickly under questioning and laid out every detail of how Adrian had pulled him in, how they had cooked the books, and how they had covered the $6 million gambling debt. The morning financial news had already run the story. The headline was brutal. Scandal at Voss Group. CEO's male best friend accused of embezzling over $100 million. Victoria had barely begun to process that blow when an even bigger one landed. Chloe suddenly pushed open the conference room door, her expression visibly unsettled. She walked quickly to Victoria's side and leaned down to whisper in her ear. Victoria, 3 of our core suppliers just called at the same time. They want to renegotiate payment terms, the 60-day terms they've been giving us. They want to shorten to 7 days. What? Victoria shot to her feet. And 2 of our key distributors are saying they want to terminate their exclusive agency agreements. Victoria stood frozen, feeling the floor beneath her feet crumbling away. It was not the money she could not bear. 800 million hurt, but she could carry it. The falling stock price she could carry. The bank calling in the loan she could carry. But suppliers and distributors turning on her at the same time would strangle Voss Group's cash flow directly. In a company without cash flow was like a body with its throat cut. And no matter how strong the frame, it would not survive 3 minutes. She stepped out of the conference room and started making calls personally. The first supplier was a man named Lewis, someone she had shared meals with on multiple occasions, always smiling and full of warmth. He answered, and his voice was perfectly courteous. But the courtesy was armor plated with distance. Victoria, I want to help, I really do. But we have our own pressures on this end. Manufacturing margins are thin. We can't afford long payment cycles. 7 days is the industry standard now. It's truly not personal. Victoria held her patience and talked with him for 10 minutes. He would not budge. The second supplier was more direct. The call lasted 3 minutes before he delivered the closing line. Victoria, don't take this the wrong way, but the 60-day terms you've enjoyed were because Voss Group had a sterling reputation and a stable position. Now that everyone's heard about Apex pulling out, any business in my position would be taking extra precautions. That's just the reality. The third supplier did not pick up the phone at all. Victoria stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand, staring out the window at the grey morning sky, her mind replaying Lewis's words on a loop. 60-day terms you've enjoyed were because Voss Group had a sterling reputation. 60-day terms in their industry. That was an extraordinarily favorable condition. For 3 years, Voss Group had never once struggled with payment terms. Suppliers had competed to work with them, each offering sweeter conditions than the last. She had never once stopped to ask why. She had assumed it was because Voss Group was strong, because its performance was excellent, because her own negotiation skills were sharp. Now she was beginning to understand the real reason. Victoria pulled up the number for Arthur, the owner of Cross-Atlantic Industries, Baycrest's largest raw materials supplier. Arthur was of her father's generation, a man who had done business in Baycrest for 30 years and operated by an old-school code. The partnership between Voss Group and Cross-Atlantic had been established while her father was still alive. Surely it would not crumble as easily as the others. The phone rang for a long time before it was picked up. Arthur's voice sounded tired. "Victoria, what's going on?" "Arthur." Victoria used the name she had called him since childhood, her voice carefully controlled to not sound like she was begging. "There's some trouble on the supplier side." I was hoping. "Victoria." Arthur sighed and cut her off. "I've heard what's been happening. Let me give you some straight talk, from someone who's known you since you were a child." Victoria gripped the phone tighter. "For 3 years, every favorable condition Voss Group has received on the supplier side, the 60-day terms, the priority fulfillment, including that annual purchasing agreement you signed last year at 15% below market price. None of that had anything to do with me giving your father's daughter a break, and it certainly wasn't because of anything you did." Victoria's breath stopped. "Someone deposited a guarantee fund with me, specifically designated to offset Voss Group's supply chain risk. It was set up 3 years ago. The amount was substantial enough to cover Voss Group for a decade with room to spare. The person who put up the money told me to keep it confidential. His exact words were, 'Victoria can never know.'" Arthur's voice paused. "I don't think I need to tell you who that person was, do I?" Victoria leaned against the wall, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "Arthur," she said, her voice unsteady. "Is it still there?" "It was pulled yesterday," Arthur said. "And it wasn't just me. Every major supplier that has a relationship with Voss Group in Baycrest got the same notice. Withdraw the guarantee. Cancel all special terms." Victoria, what on earth did you do to him? What could make a man who silently covered your back for 3 years pull everything out all at once? Victoria opened her mouth, but her throat felt packed with cotton. She could not say it. What could she say? That she had slapped him 5 times, that she had thrown $1 million at him and told him to get lost, that she had, for a man who was bleeding her dry behind her back, stomped on her husband's dignity like it was garbage under her heel. "Victoria." Arthur's voice came through the line. "Thank you, Arthur." Victoria managed and hung up. The hallway was empty. Victoria leaned against the wall, sliding down inch by inch until she was crouching on the floor. She remembered what Celia had said to her at the cliffside. "The person you least expect may be your greatest card. It's a shame when you throw that card away like trash." Not thrown away like trash, torn to pieces with her own hands and then stomped on for good measure. Now she understood. For 3 years, every smooth path Voss Group had walked had been paved brick by Julian in the shadows. She had believed it was her own skill. She had believed Voss Group's rise was powered by her business acumen. She had sat high above it all, accepting every blessing as her due, and then turned around and thrown the man who had laid those bricks out of her life with a handful of cash. Victoria buried her face in her knees, her shoulders shaking violently. Footsteps approached from the end of the hallway. Chloe knelt down beside her, her voice very gentle. "Victoria, the board members are still waiting in the conference room." Victoria drew a deep breath. wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up. She adjusted her collar, tucked her disheveled hair behind her ears, and steadied herself on her heels. "Let them wait. There is one thing I need you to do first." "What is it?" "Find out where Julian is today. I don't care where he is. I'm going to see him." Chloe hesitated, then said carefully, "Victoria, I just received word. Mr. Julian has a signing ceremony this afternoon at 2 o'clock at the cliffside in a strategic partnership signing between Apex Capital and Orion Holdings. National-level media will be there." Victoria checked the time on her phone. 2 in the afternoon. It was 10 in the morning now. She still had time. "Have the driver bring the car around," Victoria said, and without another word she strode toward the elevator. The first autumn rain in Baycrest came down without warning. Ine sat in a private tea room on the second floor of the cliffside, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as raindrops pocked the surface of the sea. Marcus stood behind me, a file in his hand, hesitating over whether to hand it to me. "If you have something, say it," I said, lifting my teacup. "Victoria is here." At the main gate of the cliffside, in no appointment. His security stopped her at the entrance. Marcus paused. "She didn't bring an umbrella. It's raining hard." I took a sip of tea and said nothing. "Also," Marcus said, placing the file on the table, "the material you asked me to compile earlier, it's complete. In 17 times. I set down my teacup and opened the file. In page 1, in autumn 3 years ago. In Voss Group's first hostile takeover attempt, the aggressor being Sterling Group, then Voss Group's biggest competitor in Baycrest. Sterling had paid a fortune to buy off a senior executive at Voss Group, obtaining core pricing data, and was preparing to launch a surprise attack at a board meeting. The night I learnt of it, I funneled $300 million into Sterling through a third-party channel with a single condition attached: abandon the takeover. Sterling weighed the offer and accepted. Victoria arrived at the office the next day to find the threat had evaporated. She told her subordinates, Sterling wasn't so formidable after all. Page 2. Winter 3 years ago. In a major production accident at one of Voss Group's core factories, 2 workers critically injured. If the story hit the media, Voss Group's stock would have plunged 2 limit downs in a single day. Within 2 hours of the accident, I arranged for the best medical team to take over the workers' care and, through channels, locked the story inside the factory gates. The compensation payments were wired anonymously to the families, $500,000 each. Victoria never knew it had happened. She never even knew those 2 workers had nearly lost their lives. Page 3. 2.5 years ago, Victoria traveled out of state to close a critical deal. The company owner on the other side of the table had other intentions and slipped something into her drink at dinner. My people were stationed in the hotel corridor the entire night. They intercepted him before he could get anywhere near Victoria's room. The methods used afterward were not pretty, but they were effective. Victoria woke the next morning knowing nothing, signed the contract successfully, and came back bragging to Adrian about her alcohol tolerance. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6, I turned the pages one after another. Each page was a knife that had been aimed at her. Each page was a pitfall she had never seen. 17 times. Commercial sieges and personal threats. Traps laid by competitors and landmines buried by her own executives. 3 years. On average, once every 2 months, Victoria had known nothing about any of them. Not because she was not sharp enough, but because I had disarmed every threat before it reached her, filled every trap before she stepped into it, and sheathed every blade before it could cut her. The world she saw was calm seas and clear skies, and so she believed she was gliding through the business world on her own brilliance. Inai closed the file and handed it to Marcus. "Bring this down to her." Marcus blinked. "Julian, right now."
Right now.
I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the figure, standing in the rain at the main gate of the cliffside. She came looking for me, didn't she? Let her see exactly who she came looking for. Marcus nodded and went downstairs with the file. The rain was getting heavier. From the second-floor window I had a clear view of the main gate. Victoria stood outside the iron gate, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, her heels caked with mud. The security guard stood inside the gate under an umbrella. his face full of discomfort. He had probably never seen a female CEO worth tens of billions standing in the rain like a drowned woman begging to be let in. Marcus walked to the gate with an umbrella, exchanged a word with the guard, and the iron gate opened a crack. Marcus did not let her in. He simply handed the file through the gap. Victoria took it with shaking hands. In rain pelted the pages, smearing some of the ink, but not enough to make it unreadable. She opened to the first page. She read only a few lines, and her entire body went rigid. Then she turned to the second page, the third, the fourth. In rain hammered her body, the file in her hands, the puddles at her feet. She did not seek shelter. She did not even lift a hand to shield herself. She just stood there, turning page after page, her fingers moving slower and slower, her shoulders collapsing further with each one. By the seventh page, she crouched down. In not sitting, not leaning, in crouching, her arms wrapped around her knees, the file pressed against her chest, the paper growing soft and pulpy from the rain. Ine saw her shoulders shaking hard. The rain was too loud to hear if she was making any sound, but she was definitely crying. In Victoria, in all the time I had known her, from the first day of our wedding to the night she slapped me, had not shed a single tear in my presence in 3 full years. By the 12th page she was on her knees, not the theatrical, graceful kind of kneeling. Her legs had simply given out, and her knees hit the wet concrete with a force I could feel even from the 2nd floor. She knelt there, her soaked hair clinging to her face, the file in her arms reduced to a pulp of wet paper, but her fingers still clutched it, refusing to let go. Marcus stood beside her with his umbrella, his expression complicated. He glanced back at the 2nd floor of the cliffside. Ine knew he was looking for my window. Ine drew the curtain closed, not because I could not bear to watch. Ine did not want her to think I was up here enjoying her humiliation. My purpose today was not to humiliate Victoria. It was to make her see the truth, in 17 times, each one documented in black and white. She was not stupid. She could read perfectly well. The person she should be kneeling to was not me. It was the version of herself who had been blind and foolish for 3 years. But even so, I did not want to watch anymore. My phone rang. Celia, Julian, everything is set for the afternoon signing ceremony. The media are here. The people from Apex and Orion are here as well. When will you come down? I'm on my way. I hung up and took 2 steps toward the door, then stopped. Ine sent Marcus a message. When she's done crying, get her some dry clothes. Don't let her stand at the gate affecting the signing ceremony this afternoon. I put my phone in my pocket, pushed open the door, and headed downstairs. The afternoon ceremony was the signing of the strategic partnership between Apex Capital and Orion Holdings. The scale was massive. Over 20 national media outlets were in attendance. After today, Apex's position in Baycrest and beyond would rise to a new level. For me, this was business I had been preparing for half a year. Victoria and Voss Group were a pebble on the road. You kick it aside and keep walking. But as I reached the ground floor, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Ine looked up. Victoria had somehow pushed her way through the main gate. She was drenched, her makeup completely ruined, wearing only one heel. She was barefoot on the marble floor of the cliffside's main hall. Security guards were chasing after her, but Marcus raised a hand and stopped them. The hall was filled with guests and media reporters who had arrived for the afternoon ceremony. Every head turned to look at her. Victoria looked at me and walked forward 1 step at a time. Every footstep she left on the marble floor was a wet print. She stopped 3 paces away from me. Ine looked at her and said nothing. Her eyes were severely swollen and red. Her lips trembled, and her posture was still straight, but her entire body looked like it had been hollowed out, held upright by nothing more than a thin layer of skin. 17 times, she said, and her voice was so hoarse I could barely make out the words, Julian. In 17 times. I still said nothing. Why didn't you tell me? She stepped forward, and her voice suddenly rose, cracking with tears and fury and a resentment she could not fully direct at me or at herself. 3 years. 3 years, and you said nothing. You let me walk around like an idiot who didn't understand anything. You let me? Let you what? I interrupted. Victoria's mouth hung open. Whatever words she had been about to say jammed in her throat. What would have happened if I had told you? My voice was not loud, but the hall was so quiet that every word carried with perfect clarity. 3 years ago, if I had told you, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was making up stories, that I was so desperate to latch onto you that I had lost my mind? Victoria's lips trembled uncontrollably. You never asked me a single thing. I looked directly into her eyes. Victoria, in 3 years, did you ever ask me how my day was? Did you ever ask me what I was thinking? You never even looked at me properly. In your world, Julian was background noise. In a stranger you happened to live with, you never even asked. How was I supposed to tell you? Victoria closed her eyes. 2 lines of tears slid down her cheeks, mixing with the rain still dripping from her face. The divorce papers I signed are with you, I said. 3 copies, all signed by me. All that's missing is your signature. Sign them and we are square. You don't need to carry those 17 things on your conscience. That was what I should have done as your husband. Even if you never acknowledged me as your husband, it was still something I promised my father I would do. I walked around her and headed toward the signing ceremony stage. In behind me, Victoria's voice came, so small I could barely hear it. Julian. I did not stop. Julian. Her voice grew louder, carrying an emotion I had never heard from her before. I am not signing. Do you hear me? I'm not signing the divorce papers. I stopped and looked back at her. She stood in the center of the hall, 1 foot bare, her soaked clothes dripping water onto the floor, her eyes as swollen as she was, but her gaze was steady. She stared at me, her chin lifted slightly, her expression hovering somewhere between defiance and total collapse. I am not signing, she repeated, her voice trembling but every word distinct. You think you can show me 17 pages and make me sign my name and walk away? Julian, forget it. I am not signing. Everyone in the hall was watching the 2 of us, their eyes moving back and forth. The media cameras had at some point turned toward us. I looked at her for 3 seconds. Then I turned around and continued walking toward the stage. Signing is your choice, I said without looking back. But Voss Group, as of today, no longer bears your name. When the signing ceremony concluded, Marcus handed me a freshly printed document. Apex Capital had completed the acquisition of 51% of Voss Group shares through a combination of open market purchases and negotiated block trades. Combined with the shares I already held through other channels, absolute control of Voss Group had, as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, passed out of Victoria's hands. I flipped through the document, verified that the terms were in order and closed it. Notify Voss Group's board secretary. Emergency shareholder meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The new controlling shareholder will meet with company management. Marcus nodded. Shall I schedule it in Voss Group's conference room? No. I handed the document to him. In my office. Let her come and knock on the door. The next morning at 8:30, I was seated in the CEO's office on the top floor of Voss Group headquarters. To be precise, it was now my office. Victoria had occupied this chair for 3 years. Italian leather, perfectly angled backrest. It was admittedly comfortable. Her things still sat on the desk, in an Hermes pen holder, in a photo of her and her father. And that framed picture, the one she had knocked over in the board meeting the other day of her and Adrian at a charity gala, now righted again and placed back on the desk. In-housekeeping must have done it. I wondered what Victoria had felt seeing that frame back in its spot. I picked up the frame, glanced at it, and laid it face down on the desk. Marcus walked in with 8 men in suits trailing behind him, every one of them carrying a briefcase. They were the legal, finance, and operations teams I had brought over from Apex Capital. Today they would execute the full legal process for the transfer of controlling interest in Voss Group. Julian, Marcus said, placing a procedural agenda on the desk. The shareholders are all here, waiting in the main conference room downstairs. Victoria is here as well, in her old office. Well, I say old office, but it's actually the vice president's office next door to this one. How is she? Hard to read. Marcus considered the question. She came in this morning with full makeup, a new suit, her hair freshly styled. She looked like she was heading into battle. I allowed myself a small smile. That was Victoria. Even if the sky was collapsing, She would apply her lipstick first and then go find a support beam. The woman who had knelt in the rain crying the night before had been put away the moment the sun came up. Let her wait. The shareholder meeting comes first. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the main conference room of Voss Group. In around the oval table sat over 20 people. In-board members, senior executives, and several outside shareholders with significant stakes. These were the same people who had been whispering behind Victoria's back 2 days ago, and now they sat rigidly upright, their expressions hovering between deference and unease. They were not afraid of me. They were afraid of my 51%. Ini took my seat at the head of the table. This chair had been Victoria's exclusive perch. Ini sat down, and several people around the table exchanged glances they could not quite hide. "Everyone," I said, opening the file in front of me. "Today's emergency shareholder meeting has a single agenda item, the management restructuring plan, following the change of Voss Group's controlling shareholder. Philip," the former vice chairman of Voss Group's board, who was seated to my right, cleared his throat carefully and asked, "Mr. Julian," regarding Victoria's position. "She will continue as CEO," I said. In a ripple of soft murmurs moved through the room. Everyone had expected me to throw Victoria out. After all, she had slapped me 5 times in front of half the Baycrest business world just 3 nights ago. That was not a grudge most people would let go of easily. However, I said, flipping to the next page of the file, Voss Group's Financial Approval Authority, Major Investment Decision Authority, and Core Personnel Appointment Authority will all be transferred to the controlling shareholder. In plain terms from now on, Miss Victoria will be responsible for the company's day-to-day operations. But spending money hiring and firing key people and setting strategic direction, those 3 things will require my signature. Philip opened his mouth, glanced at the faces of the other board members, and swallowed whatever he had been about to say. Even a fool could see what this meant. In Victoria's CEO title had been hollowed out. She could still sit in her office and manage daily affairs, but the real power had been fully transferred to me. She was no longer the head of Voss Group. She was a high-level employee. "If anyone has objections, now is the time to raise them," I said, looking around the table. No one spoke. Every person in the room understood what 51% absolute control meant. I could make any decision without needing a single other shareholder's consent, including replacing every person sitting at this table. No objections. Then we moved to the next item. I closed the file. "Bring Miss Victoria in." Marcus walked to the conference room door and pulled it open. Ini saw Victoria standing in the hallway. She wore a deep navy business suit, her hair pinned up with immaculate precision, her makeup polished down to her eyelashes, and her posture was exactly what it had been in the hall at the cliffside. Spine straight, chin lifted, not a trace of avoidance in her eyes. If I did not know her, I would have thought this woman had just won the world. But I knew her, and so I saw the hand she was clenching at her side, knuckles white from the pressure. Victoria walked into the conference room, her heels striking the floor in crisp, even beats. She moved to the far end of the table, the position directly opposite mine with the full length of the oval table between us. It was her habitual negotiating position, maximum distance from the opponent, best sight lines forcing the other party to lift their gaze to her, but she had forgotten that today she was not the opponent. She was here to hear me announce my decisions. "Miss Victoria, please sit," I said, gesturing to the chair in front of her. Victoria did not sit immediately. She stood there, looking into my eyes, her lips moving slightly as though she was confirming that the person in her chair was really me. Then she pulled out the chair and sat, the motion slow, every detail tightly controlled. "I've had the decisions from today's shareholder meeting printed out." I pushed a document across the table toward her. "You can review it first." Victoria lowered her head and opened the document, reading page by page, line by line. She read slowly, as though she was pulling every word apart and swallowing it. Everyone else in the room watched her, the tension in the air stretched like a wire about to snap. When she reached the last page, her finger paused. Financial Approval Authority, Major Investment Decision Authority, Core Personnel Appointment Authority, all transferred to the controlling shareholder. She read the 3 lines aloud, her voice steadier than I had expected. In other words, from today, my job as CEO is basically managing administrative logistics and daily operations. That is roughly accurate, I said. Victoria closed the document, placed it on the table, and lifted her head to meet my eyes. Her expression was complicated. There was anger in it, and unwillingness, and humiliation. But there was also something else I could not quite read. I have one question, she said. Ask, how much did you spend to acquire 51% of Voss Group? I glanced at Marcus. He flipped open his folder and stated a number. Victoria was silent for 3 seconds after hearing it. Then she suddenly smiled. The smile was brief, just a flicker, but it was real. Oh, not a cold smile, not a bitter smile, an actual, genuine smile. That is nearly a 20% premium over the valuation I commissioned for the company, she said. You paid almost 20% above fair value with real money to buy a company you could have had without spending a single dollar. She did not finish the thought out loud, but everyone at the table understood. I was her husband. If I had not signed the divorce papers, if I had not left the Voss household, a portion of Voss Group would eventually have been mine. When she said without spending a single dollar, she was not implying some scheme. She was stating a fact. We were married. You signed the divorce papers, you gave up all claims to post-marital assets. Then you used real money to buy out Voss Group's controlling stake on the open market. Victoria's voice finally registered a tremble. Julian, what exactly do you want? I looked into her eyes and answered, one word at a time. What I want is not Voss Group. What I want is fairness. The room went so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning in the corner. Every ounce of coldness you gave me over 3 years, every word of contempt, every dismissive glance, those things cannot be calculated in monetary terms, and I am not here to collect payment for them. But those 5 slaps, those 5 times your hand landed on my face, were not because I had done something wrong. They were because you blinded yourself for a liar. I stood up and took another document from Marcus, placing it in front of Victoria. This is a consultancy agreement you signed with Adrian last year. He used this agreement as leverage to siphon $37 million from your finance department. Every transaction was handled jointly by him and Gerald. Every single one has a record. Victoria's eyes dropped to the document. She did not reach for it. She did not need to. Gerald had already confessed everything to the Financial Crimes Unit in exhaustive detail. Adrian, sitting in a detention cell, had laid out everything he had done. Read it yourself, I said. See what Adrian called you behind your back. Victoria's eyes moved down the document and stopped at a line in the interrogation transcript. Adrian's exact words, Victoria is basically a cash machine. You say a few sweet things to her and she spits out money. Her fingers clenched so hard the knuckles went white, the nails nearly cutting into her palms. The person she had chosen 3 years ago, the person she had trusted most for 3 years, she had chosen him over her own husband. Behind her back, he had not even given her the dignity of a full name. He called her a cash machine. Now, I said, pushing one final document toward her, this is the new controlling shareholders' letter of intent for the retention of Voss Group's CEO. You can sign and stay. You can refuse and walk away. The choice is yours. 2 documents lay before her. One was an interrogation transcript in which Adrian called her a cash machine. The other was a retention offer from her new boss, InSign, and she would go from owner to employee, from the head of Voss Group to someone who worked for me. Refuse, and the company she had spent 5 years building would, as of today, have nothing more to do with her. Victoria stared at those 2 documents for a very long time. Over 20 pairs of eyes in the conference room focused on her, waiting for her answer. Her hand slowly moved toward the table. Her fingers hovered over the 2 documents for a full 5 seconds. Then her hand shifted to the document on the right, the retention letter. She opened the cover and picked up the pen. Victoria, the board member sitting nearest to her, could not stop himself from speaking. His voice was thick with regret and resignation.
Are you really? Shut up.
Victoria did not look up. One word, and it sealed every mouth in the room. She turned to the last page and signed her name. Every stroke was carved into the paper with force, the pen tip nearly tearing through. When she finished, She capped the pen, pushed the document back to me, and lifted her head, meeting my eyes directly. "Julian, you said you wanted fairness." Her voice was low, but every word came out as though forced between clenched teeth. "I am not signing this to hold on to a CEO title. I am signing because I owe you. For 3 years, you did 17 things for me, and I knew about none of them. You have your accounts to settle with me. I have my accounts to settle with you." She stood up, braced both hands on the conference table, and leaned forward slightly. In that moment, she was no longer the woman who had knelt and wept in the rain. She was the CEO of Voss Group, the woman who had taken a family business on the brink of collapse and multiplied its value dozens of times over in 5 years. "I will stay," she said, "not because you are the controlling shareholder, because I want to watch. I want to see exactly how capable you really are. I want to see what you can do from that chair. You want me to work for you? Fine, but don't expect me to bow my head." She picked up her bag, turned, and walked out of the conference room. The sound of her heels on the floor was louder than when she had entered, each step a declaration of something. The door closed behind her, and the room was silent for a beat. Philip pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead, then muttered a line that everyone heard but no one answered. "Are those two husband and wife or sworn enemies?" I did not respond to that. Inni closed the signed retention letter, placed it into a document sleeve, handed the rest of the meeting over to Marcus, and walked out of the conference room. Inni was barely in the hallway when my phone rang. "Celia, Julian, there's a development you need to know about." "Tell me." "The Adrian case has a new lead." The Financial Crimes Unit, while tracing his accounts, found a thread we hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just embezzling from Voss Group. He was also running goods out through Voss Group's supply chain. The receiving end was a trading company registered offshore. The beneficial owner of that company is someone you and Victoria both know. "Who?" "Victoria's uncle, Vincent." I stopped walking. Vincent, Victoria's father's only brother, the second largest shareholder of Voss Group. 3 years ago, when Victoria took over the company, he was the only board member who voted against her. At the time, everyone assumed he simply did not want his niece running the show. Looking back now, it was not Victoria he objected to. It was the fact that he had not gotten what he wanted. "Julian," Celia said, her voice lowering, "if I'm reading this correctly, Adrian was never really after Victoria. He was a chess piece Vincent planted beside her from the very beginning. That 6 million Adrian lost in Vegas, that wasn't Adrian's own gambling. He was set up by Vincent's people. Once he was trapped, they used Gerald to pull him in deeper step by step, until Adrian was working for Vincent without even fully realizing it." I leaned against the hallway wall and pressed my fingers to my temple. "In Victoria, you turned yourself into such a massive target. A male best friend bleeding you from the inside was not enough. Your own uncle had to stick a knife in your back as well. All those years you were charging through the business world, you thought the whole world was applauding you. Half of them were setting traps. How many people currently know about this lead?" I asked. "The investigators just uncovered it. Outside of the investigative team, you and I are the only ones. Keep it quiet for now," I said. "Keep eyes on Vincent, but don't spook him." "Understood." I hung up and stood in the hallway of Voss Group's top floor, looking out at the Baycrest skyline through the glass. Sunlight streamed through the curtain wall and threw bright rectangles of light onto the floor. At the end of the hallway, Victoria's figure flickered past. She walked into the vice president's office and closed the door, moving from the CEO's office to the VP's office. The distance was only a few dozen feet, but for her, those few dozen feet were probably longer than the entire drive from Baycrest to the cliffside. But that was fine. "In Victoria, you think I sat down in your office to get revenge. That's why you signed your name and stayed. You want to fight me to the end. You have never truly trusted me, not even now. You still look at me with wariness. That's all right. Before, I stood behind you and blocked 17 blades you never saw, and you didn't believe it was real. Now I'll stand across from you and let you see with your own eyes who your real opponent is." I pulled out my phone and sent Marcus a message. "Pull every transaction record between Vincent and Adrian, going back 3 years. Also, find out exactly how many Voss Group shares Vincent currently holds." I put the phone back in my pocket and glanced once more toward the vice president's office at the end of the hallway. A line of light showed beneath the door. Victoria was inside, probably reorganizing her thoughts, trying to find her footing in the new order. Good. Let her prepare. By the time she was ready, the real fight would just be beginning. Adrian was brought in just as Victoria sat down across from me. We were in the CEO's office on the top floor of Voss Group headquarters. In my office now, Victoria sat in the visitor's chair. She had been in and out of this office several times since signing her retention agreement. But every time she settled into that guest chair, her back went rigid as a steel plate. The door opened. Marcus and 2 other men escorted Adrian inside. Escorted was perhaps too gentle a word. Adrian could barely hold himself upright. His wrists were still cuffed. His hair was a tangled mess, his face ashen, his lips cracked and peeling, his clothes the same ones he had been wearing when they took him in, wrinkled beyond recognition. The moment his eyes found me, his knees buckled. He started sliding toward the floor. Marcus had to grab him by the collar to keep him from collapsing completely. "Julian, he's here. The investigators gave us 30 minutes. I nodded, then turned to Victoria. "Do you know how much money this man siphoned out of your company?" Victoria did not look at Adrian. Her eyes were fixed on the window, and her voice was flat. "Gerald confessed to 120 million, adding the goods he ran through the offshore channel. Roughly 200 million total." 210 million, I corrected. Ine picked up a statement from my desk and read through it aloud. Every dollar Adrian had funneled out of Voss Group's finance department over 3 years. Dates, amounts, transaction paths, all of it. Adrian knelt on the floor, head hanging, shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Ine set the statement down, leaned back in my chair and looked down at him. "Adrian, I didn't bring you here today to settle the 210 million. That's for the authorities to handle. I brought you here for a different account." I raised my hand and tapped my fingers lightly against my own left cheek. 5 slaps. "Do you remember?" Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes overflowing with panic. His lips quivered for several seconds before he managed to force out the words, "Julian, I was wrong. I was so wrong." "You weren't wrong." I cut him off. "That night, when you had Victoria slap me 5 times, you thought you were being very clever. You thought you were the smart one and Victoria was the fool and I was just garbage you could step on whenever you felt like it. You weren't wrong, you just didn't know who I was." I stood up from the desk, walked over to Adrian, crouched down, and met his eyes at his level. "Now I'll tell you who I am," I said, "controlling shareholder of Apex Capital, largest stakeholder in Orion Holdings, owner of 51% of Voss Group. You don't need to remember those titles. You only need to remember one number. 4 billion. Adrian's pupils contracted sharply. The 800 million Apex pulled, the premium I paid to acquire 51% of Voss Group. The losses from the supply chain renegotiations triggered when I withdrew my guarantees. Add it all together and you get roughly $4 billion. I patted his cheek very lightly. "You thought those 5 slaps were worth quite a lot, didn't you? 200,000 per slap. Now let me do the math for you. The actual cost of those 5 slaps was $4 billion. That comes out to 800 million per slap." Victoria sat on the sofa, her fingers tightening soundlessly. She knew I was not settling accounts with Adrian. Ine was settling accounts with her. Those 5 slaps had landed on Julian's face, but the real damage had landed on everything she owned. Adrian knelt on the floor, his forehead beaded with sweat. He seemed to be trying to say something, but all that came out of his throat was a strangled, incoherent noise. He turned his head and looked at Victoria, his eyes carrying one last desperate hope, as though he thought she might speak a word on his behalf. Victoria stood up, picked up her bag, and walked around the sofa toward the door. She looked down at Adrian. The glance lasted less than a second. "Victoria," Adrian's voice cracked with tears. "Victoria, say something for me, please." Victoria pulled her gaze away, opened the door, and walked out without looking back. The door closed behind her, and Adrian's last thread of hope snapped with it. Ine gave Marcus a look. Marcus hauled Adrian up from the floor and dragged him half-carried out of the office. The sound of Adrian's tearful pleading faded down the corridor until there was nothing left. The office went quiet. Ine sat alone in the CEO's chair and picked up the framed photo that had been lying face down on the desk. In Adrian and Victoria at a charity gala, champagne glasses clinking frozen mid-toast, both of them beaming. Ine dropped the frame into the trash. 1 week later, all the agreements were signed. The equity transfer for Voss Group, the management restructuring, the supply chain renegotiations, the bank loan reassessments. Every step had been a separate battle. Victoria participated in the entire process in her capacity as CEO, sitting in conference rooms listening to my people announce one decision after another, her pen strokes firm and unhesitating whenever her signature was required. Only once did she hesitate. The final document was signed. Ine asked everyone else to leave the conference room. Leaving just the two of us, Ine pushed a file across the table toward her, the divorce papers from before, all 3 original copies. Signing the retention letter doesn't void this, I said. Whether you sign it is entirely your decision. Victoria looked down at the papers. She had seen them so many times she could recite every clause from memory. She picked up the pen, her fingers pale from the pressure of her grip. She turned to the last page and wrote something next to the signature line, not a signature. In a few words, when she finished, she closed the document, pushed it back to me, and said, "You'll have my weekly report on Monday as scheduled." Then she picked up her bag and walked out. Her heels struck the floor with a steady rhythm, neither fast nor slow. Ine opened the document. Next to the signature line, she had added a single line of text. The pen strokes were deep, nearly carved through the paper. In Victoria, she had signed her name after all. Ine closed the document, placed it in my desk drawer, and leaned back in the chair, looking up at the ceiling. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting strips of light and shadow across the floor. The office was deeply quiet. Ine suddenly felt tired, in not physical exhaustion. It was the kind of weariness that washes over you after a very long fight has finally ended. What needed to be repaid had been repaid. What needed to be taken had been taken. It was time to go. That evening I drove back to the old townhouse on Cedar Lane and parked in the courtyard. Ine had been staying here ever since leaving the Voss house. The place was built in an older style, with a magnolia tree in the yard that my grandmother had planted. Ine settled into the old wicker chair beneath the magnolia. The evening breeze carried a coolness laced with the scent of the flowers. My phone buzzed. Ine pulled it from my pocket, in a number I did not recognize, not saved in my contacts. The message was 3 words, "I am sorry." Ine looked at those 3 words for a very long time. The phone screen glowed pale white in the fading light of dusk. Ine knew it was Victoria. This number was my private line, known to fewer than 10 people. At this new number of hers, she had probably gotten it specifically to send these 3 words. Ine did not reply. Ine put the phone back in my pocket, leaned back in the wicker chair, and closed my eyes. The magnolia smelled sweet. The breeze was cool. The courtyard was so quiet I could hear the neighbors cooking dinner, the sizzle of something hitting a hot pan. Ine remembered that Victoria could not cook. Once, on a whim, she had announced she would make pasta. She burned the water dry and then scorched the pot, nearly setting the kitchen on fire. Ine had stood in the kitchen doorway watching her cough in the smoke, finding it somewhere between absurd and pitiful. In the end, I was the one who remade the meal. She sat at the dining table waiting, and from beginning to end she did not say thank you. I suppose she thought she didn't need to. I suppose she really believed that. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Same 3 words. "I am sorry." This time I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. Then I turned the phone face down and set it on the armrest of the wicker chair. The sky had gone completely dark. The branches of the magnolia swayed gently in the breeze. The moon had risen to exactly the height of the treetop. The kitchen light of the old townhouse glowed warm yellow. I was planning to cook for myself tonight. In there were 2 pieces of meat and some vegetables in the refrigerator. Enough for one. The phone buzzed a 3rd time. Ine did not move. A moment later, it buzzed again and again. It buzzed 7 times in total. Every time the same 3 words, not 1 word more, not 1 word less, It was as though the sender believed that if she stacked up enough of those 3 words, they might somehow cancel out 3 years of accumulated debt. Inai picked up the phone and looked at the 7 unread messages on the screen. This time I did not turn it face down. Inai opened the details page for that unknown number. Area code Baycrest. Lean activated this afternoon. Inai pressed dial. In it rang 3 times before the other end picked up. No one spoke. Inai could only hear breathing. Inai did not speak either. The 2 of us held the silence across the line, each able to hear the background noise on the other side. On her end, the sound of cars passing. She was by a roadside. On my end, the rustle of the magnolia tree in the wind. "I'm sorry." Her voice was hoarse, as though she had been crying for a long time. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I ended the call, not out of anger, not out of revenge. Inai simply did not know how a person was supposed to respond when someone who had never said the words thank you in 30 years suddenly said sorry a dozen times in a row. Maybe she truly understood she had been wrong. Maybe she had just been crushed by everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. But did an apology fix anything? The 17 business attacks I could let go because those I chose to do. The 5 slaps I could let go because I had already squared that account for $4 billion. But the look of condescension she had given me for 3 years, the impatience that had always laced her voice when she spoke my name, the fact that she had never, not once in front of any person, said the words, "This is my husband," those things could not be erased with an apology. Not every scar could be healed with 3 words. Some wounds, even after the skin grows back, are still tender underneath. Inai stood in the courtyard holding my phone for a long time. The scent of magnolia grew stronger. The neighbor's television murmured through the walls, some evening program transitioning to the weather forecast. The moon had climbed higher, casting the stone paving of the courtyard in pale light. Inai opened my messages. My thumb hovered over the screen. Inai typed a word and deleted it. Typed a line and deleted that too. After 3 or 4 attempts, I closed the messages and put the phone back in my pocket. Not yet. Inai would wait. In between us, there was still time.